Welcome to the show. Have you ever wondered how to structure or build out a talk, especially one that you want to deliver professionally? If you struggle to put talks together, or maybe you're unsure about how you should be structuring a talk or presentation, this episode is for you. Now, it can be difficult to stay on track with what you talk about and not to overly teach or to put too much information into a presentation. So, how do you structure it? What do you add? What should you leave out? How do you keep things on track to achieve the outcome of your talk? If you've ever wondered how a professional speaker puts together a talk, or maybe you've wondered what tools might be out there to help you create a keynote or presentation without just asking ChatGPT to do it for you, then this episode is going to be for you. Welcome to Present Influence, the show that helps business leaders develop the skills to impact, influence, and inspire. I'm John Ball, a keynote coach, professional speaker, and your guide on the journey to leadership-level communication and presentation skills. My mission is to provide rising leaders like yourself with everything you need to maximize your impact and present with influence. Follow the show on your favorite podcast app for weekly episodes and interviews with influence experts. If you are watching the video version of this show, which I probably do recommend for this particular episode, you might be wondering what you're seeing on the screen right now. Well, that is a Google document that is an outline of my talk. Here's the keynote that I've been working on. If you haven't already watched the first several episodes where I introduce this process to creating my new signature keynote presentation, then this is the next stage for that. So I do recommend going back and checking those episodes out first. They're quite short episodes. It won't take you too long, and to get caught up with where you are. Otherwise, maybe some of the things on here are not quite going to make sense for you at this stage. Now, before a talk even gets put together, we have to have an outline, a structure, a skeleton, if you like, that we're going to start attaching things to make it into a fleshed out presentation that's going to be able to deliver its goal. Now, one of the tools that I use to help me do this, for those of you who can see this on video, will see the box I'm holding up. These are called Cicero cards. Back on episode 21 of my show, years ago now, I did interview the creators of Cicero cards. So check that out in episode 21 if you want to know a bit more about this and some of the packs that they had at the time. They have loads more stuff available. I am planning to do another episode at some point where I'm going to go a little more into detail about the Cicero card deck and how to use that and structure things out. I probably will keep that related somewhat to what we're talking about, and I am going to introduce you to some of the elements of the cards today and in other episodes coming through, but I will pull the whole thing together so you can actually more or less see a demo of how to use these card decks. They're really simple to use, a great structuring tool to help you create any kind of presentation, not just a keynote, any kind of formal presentation, whether it's a talk that you're delivering at a Toastmasters club or a professional presentation in a business setting, whatever it is, this tool can definitely be very helpful to you. It's reasonably inexpensive. What I'm showing on my screen is the talk outline. Now, it does take you through some of the elements of the cards. Let's first of all show you some of these card elements before we bring everything back. As you can see on the screen right now, we are on the Sephiroth.it website. The creators of the Cicero cards are called Andreas Binasco and Matteo De Pascali. I have interviewed them before on the show. That was back in episode 21, so a long time ago. You can see here on the screen, this is the website, Sephiroth.it, Sephiroth.it/Cicero-deck. And you can check the cards out. Now, there's a bunch of other products available, which I do recommend taking a look at. But the one we're primarily talking about and focused on is the Cicero card deck. So I'm not going to go and explore those with you now, but I will come back to Cicero. Now, they do have some good stuff on here. There are some demonstration videos showing you how to use the product and gives you a bit of an introduction to what the product looks like and have that in action. I think that is one of the guys there sells. And forgive me if I can't remember whether it's Andreas or Matteo. But they actually do a pretty good job of analyzing some well-known speeches as well. So Martin Luther King, Barack Obama. You can see from here how things are laid out. So that's what I'm going to take you through as well as we go further into this. But do feel free to go and check out Sephiroth.it. I have no commission for recommending them to you. It's just a really good product that I like. And the guys who created it are really nice guys. When you order your Cicero cards, you will be sent an electronic version of the pack, which means you can start working on your talk straight away. You don't have to wait for the delivery, which is wonderful. And so what I'm showing you here on the screen is part of the pack, part of the printable A4 size pack. There's an A3 version as well if you want a bigger size of print off. These cards all relate to the groundwork, which is the earlier stages, the big picture of your talk. So when we go to the first groundwork card, it is the goal of the talk. What is the purpose? What do you want from the audience? Then we want the duration. How long will your speech last? Then target. Who will be present at your speech? What kind of people? What kind of language are you going to be using? Is it going to be simple or complex? What are the expectations or objections? What's the audience's opinion of what you're doing? What will they think? What equipment will you need for your talk? These are really useful things to know and to be able to answer. So let's do that. The talk is titled Hooked on a Feeling, Personal State Management for Leadership and Peak Performance. At least that's the title for now. It may get changed over time. Now, the problem that it solves is helping people who feel increasingly stressed to feel great more often and to show up as their best selves, which in turn increases productivity, improves work culture. It also helps with things like mental resilience and just generally feeling happier in your professional and personal lives as well. It does have knock-on effects. The goal of the talk is to teach the audience the why and the what of personal state management for leadership and peak performance, and a sprinkling of how to as well. Now, the duration for a keynote talk, generally a good idea to aim for about 45 minutes, which is what I will do. Now, sometimes talks you get asked to deliver less or get asked to deliver more, and sometimes that can happen on the day. One of the key reasons why it's so essential that you have a well-practiced and polished talk that you deliver. 45 minutes is usually the sweet spot. That's what I would encourage you to aim for. If you are always delivering over an hour or maybe more like an hour and a half of talk, you might be finding that you are over delivering, over teaching in those talks, and maybe doing more of a workshop combination with your keynote presentation. So I am just talking about keynote presentations here. Workshops can, of course, go on significantly longer. Do make sure you put some breaks in for people as well, though. They like that. Now, the target here is company leadership and their teams. So company leadership, teams themselves, and their teams, the people who work with them. Now, the markets I'm generally considering at the moment are the pharmaceutical industry and transport automotive. These are places that I have spoken before, have connections into. And I'm looking at these as options for the areas where I would like to be focusing on building up my speaking business. Now, not necessarily exclusively those places, but that's where I'm focusing on initially. Then you saw the card for expectations and objections. So what would be the audience expectations? Well, here, I think this may be something that they're probably not thinking about a lot of the time. People just tend to get on with the day. They wake up and they just get into it. Or they switch on the news or they look at their phones. They're not really thinking. Most people aren't being intentional about how they show up day to day. Now, objections could be that a lot of people just think, well, that's fine. I'm fine as I am. Don't need to change. Or maybe they think that the business culture doesn't really allow to be thinking like this. We just have to react and respond to everything that's going on. I wouldn't really anticipate major objections here. I think it's reasonable to probably always anticipate that there will be some resistance. Yeah, I anticipate here that that's probably mild resistance. I would be curious if it was more than that, and that's something that you should think about. But like in any good situation, you should be able to handle any objections that come up and to pace the state and the experience of your audience to think about what their expectations really are. When it comes to language, for a presentation, should it be simple or complex? Well, generally, I would say simple language. You don't want to make it like you're talking to primary school children. You're not talking to a playgroup here. But you do want it to be simple enough that it could be understood by just about anybody without getting into technical language. There are certain times when you may want to have a talk that is a little bit more technical, and that's fine for the right kind of audiences with the right kind of presentation. But for something like this is a presentation that could be taken to numerous audiences in and outside of the business realm. I want to keep the language accessible for everybody. Now, the equipment here that I'm going to go for would be a microphone and a slide projector for larger audiences. For smaller venues and small groups, probably just flyer style handouts would be all that I would need. And this isn't in the cards, but one of the things I like to consider is, and have in advance, what is the transformation that I'm going for here? What do I want the audience to be, do, have, feel, create by the end of the talk? So the effect I want to have is to help people be able to show up intentionally as their best self daily and to feel great about doing that. Now, I know that that has much more knock-on effects for them in their lives, but just this section of adding in that intentional ability to be more present in your own life or more intentional about who you are showing up as on a day-to-day basis is incredibly powerful. I think I have mentioned this in previous episodes, but I do think it's really useful if you are a professional speaker to have a framework that relates to your key topic. Now, as I've mentioned, this is taking you through a signature keynote presentation. And so with this, it's going to be a little different if you're just doing something maybe on the fly. You probably don't need to have a framework unless you already have those things in place. But if you are branding yourself in a particular market, a framework is a really useful way to do that. It also helps to set out the teaching elements of what you do and to give your audience and the people you work with a good sense of where you're going to be taking them and what more there could be available for them as well. So if you are going to create online courses or do longer term coaching and consulting with them, or you're going to be perhaps creating a book or maybe even podcasts to go with this, or you want to be going on podcasts and talking about what you do and your expertise, then a framework is a really, really useful thing to have. And you will find that many professional speakers who are really in the game as transformational speakers, as inspirational speakers, and more, they will have a framework that they teach. And sometimes it could be 2 or 3 simple elements to the framework, and sometimes it could be more. My framework is about 9 points. I was a little bit concerned that this might be too many points to a framework. However, I have spoken with a few other professional speakers. Some have more, way more than even I do. And well, I don't feel too bad about 9. And I'm not going to deliver 9 different elements of a framework within a keynote presentation anyway. I might introduce people to the 9 different elements, but I'm not going to deliver all of them. So I might maybe throw up a slide with all the 9 elements on, and then they spell out 2 different words here. And this one is feel great, and is the acronym that actually spells out. So in a 45-minute presentation, realistically, I'm probably going to deliver about 3 of those. Trying to do more than that might mean I'm under-delivering on each of those elements, and trying to do less than that might mean I end up over-teaching on them. So 3 probably is a sweet spot of points or key elements for a keynote presentation. If I were doing, I've put this underneath here as well, but you see, if I was doing something like 15 to 20 minutes, then I'm probably only going to deliver 1. If I'm doing something like 30 minutes, I might deliver 2. 45 minutes, I'll deliver 3. 60 minutes or more, I'm going to deliver 4, maybe 5 of the key elements here, depending on what feels appropriate. And I'm going to base whether I keep doing that on the feedback that I may start to get. I generally do not anticipate that I'm going to be asked too often to speak over 60 minutes, but that could happen. So I selected the elements of my framework that I think make the most sense, or perhaps even be the most important elements to deliver initially, to give some impact to the audience, to help them on that road to transformation. That even with the 3 main elements that I'm going to use, if that's all I deliver, if that's all they get and they never find out any more about any of the other elements of my framework, they're still going to get some value from that. There is still potential for transformation there that's going to make their lives and experience better. And that is my goal. That is my objective. So with all that said, we start getting into some of the basic structure of this now. So here's really where we're going to get into the key structure of the talk. And as I start to put more flesh on this, I will bring in more of the Cicero cards as well and lay that out, because I find it a really helpful way to lay out my presentation that gives me something a bit more visual to be able to look at and to perhaps even move things around and play with a bit. So you'll see that I will put this whole framework as it gets more fleshed out into the Cicero cards onto a whiteboard, and I'll share that with you as well. To kick off the talk, we need an opener. Any good piece of content online these days needs a hook, whether that's on YouTube or whether it's a podcast or whether it's a short video that you're putting out on LinkedIn or whatever. You need a hook, because if you don't have hooks, you're not going to get people hooked into what you're talking about. You have to win people over pretty fast and get them engaged in what you're doing. So I do think about things like walkout music. Now, since I have named my talk after a song, which it can be a nice way to do things, you don't have to do that. That's kind of my style and my personal taste. And I went for the song Hooked on a Feeling. That's what I'm sticking with for now. There were other contenders. It makes sense for me to have that as some walkout music. So I probably should have added into equipment as well. Yeah, there's going to be an audio musical element there. Ideally, if we can have that set up, I'm going to be having that played as I walk out onto the stage. I'm going to start off with something that does like a quick contest, split the audience into a couple of groups, and I'm going to create a very unfair competition. One half of the room is going to be winners and the other half of the room is going to be losers. And then they're going to be thinking about how they feel about that. It's just a little bit of fun, but it's going to make a key point. And then we're going to start getting into the introduction, where we're going to talk a little bit more about the content of the talk and what they can be expecting. You probably heard that principle over time. Well, tell them what you're about to tell them, then tell them the thing, and then tell them what you just told them. Great. Well, pretty much going to do that, but that's not the only thing that we need to do here. So I'm going to be framing up what the talk is going to be about, what we're going to be getting into. And we want to make sure that we're keeping people engaged as much as possible. So at this stage, we want to pace some of their experience, especially some of their stressful experience in their day-to-day lives. We might use a bit of story to do that. I'm still playing with whether I'm going to include a story here or not, because realistically, in the time breakdown for a talk, probably about 7, maybe 8 minutes for the intro here. So maybe a very quick story that helps to pace their shared experience, or I might just give some examples from my own life rather than a full-on story here. But I definitely want to introduce concepts like whether you're living at cause or being an effect of life. I also want to get to the what's in it for me very quickly for them. So that's the question we always have to answer for our audience. What's in it for me? Why should I pay attention to this? What am I going to benefit from listening to this right to the end? I'm going to introduce them to the influences that stress us out, and to what I'm talking about when I mention things like intentionality and showing up. I am going to very quickly introduce them to the 9-point framework and the 3 to 4 key points that I'm going to be talking about with them on the day. I'm also going to ask them permission. This is something I got from one of my business mentors, Taki Moore, a very good coach marketing guy if you are a coach and want some help there. Ask for permission to share with them where they can get more information at the end of the talk. No one's going to say no to you here. It's like, is it okay? If you're saying on stage, is it okay with you if I tell you towards the end of the talk where you can go to get more information? No one's going to say no to that, are they? So don't be afraid to do that, but you kind of ask for tacit permission to a degree. Now, from here, we need to transition into the first key principle or element of the talk. And transitions between the different segments of your talk are important. So rather than having clunky things like, and now this, or now we've talked about this thing, let's talk about this thing. And then we just don't want things to be clunky or hackneyed. Those are kind of what everybody says. So we want to make sure there's a smooth flow between each of the sections. So here I'm going to be saying, now, if you were anything like me, you like to have a good reason to do something, solid motivation. We must choose that for ourselves based on what's important to us. And that's going to lead me into the first key principle, which is to find your vision. What's the impact you want to make today? Decide a purpose for yourself. Who do you need to become to achieve this? How are you going to show up today? So we want to deliver the why this is important to them for each of these key elements here as well. Why we're talking about this, because we need to have a direction to move in. Most people find themselves coasting in the currents of their lives. They're good starters, but not good finishers. And we increase the baseline of our happiness and fulfillment when we take action. We can work backwards from outcomes. Then we want to get into some of the what. And I'm not going to go through this for every single one. I'm just going to show you for this first element here, was why I'm kind of reading it out from the slide. The what is you're either building your own vision or you're building someone else's. And this needs to be aligned with your values or you will lose interest. We'll talk about where fulfillment and flow come from and moving toward our vision, our own vision and purpose. Now, in addition to this, I'm going to add a story in here that's going to relate probably from my own experience, but it could be from a client. It could be something a little more parabolic that might be, maybe even a created story or a commonly shared story. I would generally try and stay away from the stories that speakers often use all the time. And there are some particular stories that just get dragged out again and again. Everybody's heard them and nobody's surprised by them. So, I've often found this with listening to, I read and listen to a lot of personal development stuff. And often it's the same stories you end up hearing again and again. So try and keep your stories somewhat more original than most people do. I always love the story of the Chinese farmer with the concept of, is something good or bad? Like this thing happens and all the neighbors come and say, oh, that's terrible. And he says, we'll see. Then good thing happens, says, oh, that's wonderful. You're so lucky. He says, we'll see. That story has been used so many times by so many speakers. I would not put it in to a keynote presentation as much as I love it and get value from it. So try and come up with your own version of something that gives the same kind of effect. Want a story here that's going to illustrate the principle in action and is going to even give a little bit of a sense of the how to do something to change this, how to find your vision and do that for yourself. So here it might actually be good for me to talk about how I've done that for myself, or maybe even a client I've worked with to help them do that in my life as well. So I love things like that. Good to have those stories. They need to be told as stories. So you don't want to be too matter of fact about it. And you certainly don't want them to be, I said this, and then he said that, and then she came along and said and did this. That's really boring. You're not just relating a story. You need to tell a good story. It needs to have the beginning, middle, and end to it. It needs to have some stakes into the story. And it needs to be engaging for your audience. So practice your storytelling skills there. I haven't selected stories for the talk yet. I'm still working on that. But I will introduce you to those as we go along as well. So then I'm going to transition into key point 2. Now, the reason I haven't put the transition in here at the moment is because I think the transition may well be influenced by the story that I'm going to lead out of into section 2. So it doesn't make sense for me to create the transition right now until I have that. But then I'm going to get to my second key point. So in this case, it's going to be enjoy the ride. So I'm going to be talking about the need to be more present and stop living in automatic and add some conscious intention into life. And then again, we go through the why, we go through the what, and some story to illustrate that and maybe even show them how it's done. We're not giving them the full how-to. We're not taking through a hand-by-hand, here's the instructions on how to do this. We're not doing workshop activities with them in a keynote where we're going to get them to join in. We are delivering a story where they can visualize, try it on. Stories are incredibly powerful and you will need them in your presentation. That again is going to lead us into another transition into the third part. And saying similarly as before, the transition isn't here now because I haven't selected the stories yet. I am going to refer to my story library, and I do have a library of stories that I have put together over a number of years to be able to go and pull from the stories from my own experience that I can then use in my presentation. So if you don't have that for yourself, definitely a good idea to do a little bit of story workshopping, story brainstorming, pull some stuff together to get your stories out of yourself. It can be hard to do that on the fly when you are actually creating the talks. But if you can actually go through your own library of talk ideas or concepts, or maybe ones you have already used before that might still be relevant here, then it's easy to see which stories are going to be most effective to illustrate what you want to show here. So again, the story that I use will influence the transition into key point 3. In this instance, key point 3 is leaving complaining and criticizing behind, taking responsibility and so on. We go through the why and the what again with another story, which will transition to close. Now, for transitioning to close, it really wasn't so important for me that I might need to transition something from the story into the next element. which is why I actually have the transition here to introduce my audience to one of my favorite quotes from all time from Lao Tzu: "To know and not to do is to not truly know." So now that we know, how can we get to truly know? So again, this is something that often may have heard. People who've heard me speak before and people who've seen me at events may even know that this is my favorite all-time quote ever, and it comes up a lot in stuff that I do. I try to live by this as well. We have to not just know stuff, but do it and apply what we have. The first thing I'm going to do when I get into closing off my talk is to recap all of my key points, and I'm going to do that in reverse order. There's a reason I have for doing that as well, which I'll share with you, is that if I do end up putting in a story at the very start before the key points, what I'm going to do with that story is not finish it. I'm going to leave the critical point of that story until the very end, and I'm going to come back to it. So going reverse through the points starts to take people mentally back to the start of the presentation. I'm going to show them very quickly, introduce them to the QR code where they can go to get more information on my framework. Now, that's going to be that I'm going to send them to a video presentation that's going to list out all of the key points and a bit more about that. And that is then going to take them a little bit deeper into funnel where they can work with me, where they can either maybe check out the podcast, they can come and work with me, they can book me for a workshop, and so on. I'm going to deliver the big idea of the talk, which is that we either let the world keep happening to us and stay caught up in the currents of life, or we inject some conscious awareness and we take back the paddle so that we choose our challenges and we choose how we meet them instead of react all the time. I will put in a key quote here as well. Now, I've already introduced them to one quote from Lao Tzu. Here I want to use something of my own. For those of you who know who Dan Priestley is, it always stays with me what he said to me when I interviewed him. Don't quote other people, be quotable. So create those quotes for yourself. Here I want to do that. I want to give them something pithy and quotable that they can go out and remember into their own lives as well. Maybe they'll remember the Lao Tzu quote more. That's fine. I'm good with that. But I want to make myself quotable as well. And then I'm going to deliver my call to action. Ultimately, there are two calls to action here. There's the call to action where I want them to go and find out more about the framework and about what I do. And I've already given them the QR code for that. So that is kind of the marketing call to action. Here is their personal call to action. Here's what I want you to do with everything you've just learned today. And I'm going to make that really easy for them to do. Like, they only have to take a couple of minutes out of their lives to be able to do this, because the simpler we make a call to action and the more urgent we make it as well, because I want them to do it on the same day, the greater the chance that the audience will actually do the thing that you're asking them to do. So we want to increase that opportunity for them as much as possible. Oh, I should also say here, when I've given them the QR code, I want them to know that I'm not going anywhere after the presentation, and I want them to come and talk to me and connect with me. As a professional speaker, you want to make sure that you hang around. That's where you're going to be able to not just answer questions, but potentially get the referrals. You will have, most likely at most events, people coming up to you and saying, "That was so good. I need you to come and deliver this for my team, for my people. And can we set that up?" Great. Ideally, if you're doing well with your keynote, you should probably be getting a 2 or 3 referrals, maybe even more, at each of your events that you're getting booked for. So we've covered a lot of ground on the episode, and I hope it hasn't blown anyone's brain. If you want more information on structuring a keynote presentation, do feel free to reach out to me. And do encourage you, if you have been checking out the audio version of this episode, it may help to watch the YouTube version and be able to see the screen share, so you can actually go through some of the elements that I was talking about and see how I've structured things in the talk. And so the link is in the show notes for those of you on the audio version of the show who might want to go and find out a bit more. You'll also find the link both on YouTube and in the audio show notes to be able to go and check out Cicero cards for yourself. And I do encourage it. It's a tool I've used for a number of years now since I first discovered it. I got so excited about it, is why I reached out to the creators and invited them onto the show. Episode 21 is where you can go and listen to that interview. Now, don't expect it to be as polished as I am today on the podcast. This is very much from my early days as a podcaster, but I hope you'll still find value in that particular interview as well that we shared with them. Next time, I'm going to be bringing you an interview with a lady called Marcy Axelrod. where she's talking about one of my favorite topics about how we show up. Now, we have a lot of crossover in the things that we talk about, and I was fascinated to get connected with Marcy. Now, I will say this, she goes pretty deep with a lot of stuff. And for those of you who really want to be showing up as a better version of yourself and to understand the different ways in which we can show up and usually do, and what we can start doing to make some changes there, you won't want to miss that. Here's what I'm going to do as well. I brought Marcy back to go deeper on some of this stuff. So I'm going to have a bonus episode for you next time. I'll tell you more about that in the live episode. It won't be going out into the mainstream. Now, if you get to the end of that episode and you decide that you would love to go a bit deeper into the stuff we talked about with Marcy, I'll let you know how you can access that bonus episode. But for now, look, if you haven't already done this, and I do know some of my listeners have been doing this, and thank you so much to those of you who have, please rate and review the show. It's really easy to do, especially in Apple Podcasts. Please give us a 5-star review. Let us know what you think of the show. It helps me to get more guests onto the show and to show other people that this is a quality show that is delivering some good content for people. So if you haven't already given a review, please do. If you got some value from this, share it out as well. That makes a huge difference. For now, though, wherever you're going, whatever you're doing, have an amazing rest of your day and go and make great things happen. See ya.